I'm Jay Moran.
I'm Bridget Jaipal Valenza.
I'm Thomas O'Neill White.
We need to get together and let our voices be heard.
This is What's Next, a dedicated hour to have important conversations about the issues facing the marginalized and underrepresented communities of Western New York and Southern Ontario.
If we're going to have some real healing, we've got to have space to tell some uncomfortable truth.
What's Next continues our mission to discuss race,
equity,
and the common concerns of Buffalo's East Side and beyond.
In the suburban area, everywhere, we must work and teach our children.
What's Next is back in Jamestown today for a conversation with Casey Colburn. Casey, hi.
Hi.
Great to be in this space here. It's called Keiko, simply enough. And people can make that association through your name as well, Casey Colburn. There's a lot to talk about how you even got to this place, including a grant through the Creative Rebuilds New York program that placed you at Jamestown Community College. As a matter of fact, the folks at JCC reached out to us and told us about your story, and that's what's brought us here. So there's a lot to talk about. You're also Seneca as well, and just being here in the space right now, we've had a chance to look at some of your work that is very much steeped in Seneca tradition. Just talk about that association for you and what it means to you at this stage of your life, because you're still a very young person, but you seem to have, just in our time already talking, you seem to have a spirit that goes long beyond just those years.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so I think really where I should start is maybe with my mom's story, right? She's the one that taught me. She has seen way too many devastating, horrible things that have happened in her life. She has had to deal with, racism and lateral racism. And she was about 10 years old when Kinzua had taken effect. So at that time, she was living with my great-grandma, Cynthia Jimerson. And my great-grandma is the one that ultimately raised her as one of her own and taught her the traditional things. She grew up going to Longhouse and lived a very traditional Seneca life. My mom is not white passing, though some, because she lives off territory, will treat her as though she is not native anymore.
Okay.
Which is a little bit ridiculous, but it's one of the things that we're kind of combating here. And it's created like a huge identity issue for my mom because she almost feels like a woman without a country. And still through all that, she persevered and she passed down a lot of the culture that she was passed down. And with that became, the beadwork, passing my grandma's pattern down to her and then to me and, to my siblings. And now through me, I'm teaching my intern, and hopefully I'll be able to get more interns to be able to continue that path. And so my traditional work really is family. And I hope when people come to Keiko, they're not just seeing the culture, right? I'm actually showing you pieces that were very realistically in our living room, things that were made at the kitchen table, things that were in a shelf in the kitchen, so it was easy access so that we can just pull out all the beads and there they were. These are the items that are displayed here, really.
Right.
And so I'm not just showing culture, but I'm bringing you into my home.
And we should also mention that here at Keiko, we're on the second floor of 30 West 3rd Street?
20 West.
20 West 3rd Street here. Maybe just a couple of blocks from the Northwest Arena, another couple of blocks away from the National Comedy Center as well. Up here, it is a very large and impressive space, very open for seeing a lot of really interesting art. You also talked about your mother and your grandmother's story. Growing up, they were in Onoville, which was one of the places that was displaced by the building of the Kinzua Dam. And that seems to, again, this is something that happened long before you were born, but yet you seem to carry its impact with you today.
I think many of us do, the younger generation, we do, because we have seen, what our elders have gone through. A lot of our elders sit quietly because of all the things that have happened to them. I mean, the residential schools and then the removal and, now even things like with, New York State and what Hochul's doing, like it's a constant state of trauma. And, seeing your loved ones do that, go through that, hearing the stories, knowing that it can still happen, these are things that, we have to combat daily. It's one of the reasons why, our elders sit quietly, but it's also the reason why there's a higher level of suicide and mental health issues within the younger generations. And it's engraved in us. We have a lot of very real generational trauma.
Yet you here at Keiko, you're bringing this conversation to light. Also, let's go back maybe to your work at Jamestown Community College, because you were an artist, you were placed at JCC through that grant from Creative Rebuilds New York. How did you go about doing that type of work while at the college? Because again, the downtown Jamestown, you're in a special space here. At college, it's also a different kind of experience.
So Keiko actually came about because of the grant and because of my work through JCC. What ended up kind of happening in my position, though, is I kind of navigated from being an artist, right, an artist in residence, to filling a gap, a much larger gap, which is, for JCC, it would be kind of akin to like an Indigenous studies instructor.
Okay.
I worked a lot with the anthropology department. I also took anthropology classes while at JCC, and went to a lot of the other like classrooms and things just to talk about Indigenous culture.
What was the reception like?
Actually pretty well, especially with the student body.
Yeah, I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, they're very eager to learn. We have international students too, that it was a little bit weird, but I was like the first Native that they had encountered. And with some of my identity stuff, I'm like, wow, I'm not even like that much Native. Like, there's so many cooler people that you could have met, that like I'm thinking about like Carson Waterman and stuff. Like, he's so renowned and like his art is just phenomenal. And I'm like, get him, like go get him, because like they should meet these people,
right.
And I mean, shout out to Hayden. I'm always trying to get people to go see his work and things. And I connected him with the Roger Tory Peterson Institute, where now the Seneca Museum and the RTPI are working on like their own little grant for Native artists there. And so I've built a lot of connections and trying to get other, Seneca and Native artists known about. And we've just got so many cool people that it almost feels like they're hidden in some way in this community.
You did mention your work or your anthropology classes over at JCC, and one of your instructors actually sent over a note here that Casey has brought a wealth of knowledge and authenticity to our introduction to cultural anthropology classes at JCC. She has provided valuable insights into local Indigenous culture, traditions, and contemporary issues. So right there's plenty to talk about. We've touched upon contemporary issues. Let's maybe get into culture a little bit right now. It seems to me like when it comes to Native cultures, there's a lot going on. There's the incredible history, and I also want to mention what you showed me before, the work from the 6th century here in North America that showed some really incredible work by Native peoples here in North America. And if we could, let's just jump back to that story. I like to jump around a little bit. That was really fascinating because the work that was done on these pieces that were found here in North America, in New York City, if I'm not mistaken, was the type of work that was also being done around that same time in Rome. Yeah.
And so it's really kind of, it kind of helps me combat the idea that, with the land bridge, which is some things that it's been regurgitated over and over, and it's been disproven multiple times. But yeah, it's
you just had me going back to my 5th grade class. I'm sure that's when I first heard that.
And one of the silly things, and I'm not really here to dispute any of the history because I'm not.
No, but I think it's important in the conversation that we're having, and we have plenty of time to get into it. It's worth bringing that in because you said the land bridge. I just flashed back to when I was 10 years old. That's when I first heard that.
Well, and now because it's being disproven, now they're trying to suggest that we came by boat. But when we look at other archaeological digs of other ancestries and other ancient, peoples, we still find those artifacts. So where's the boats? You know, where are they? Because I have a hard time, like we do have canoes and things. I just have a very hard time believing that we came over by canoe, all of us.
Right.
That feels far-fetched to me. And maybe, you know, I'm not an archaeologist. I've only taken just a couple of anthropology classes. But what I do know is that anthropologists are notorious for messing things up. They like to try to prove things that, you know, helps fuel a certain type of narrative. And, you know, the colonization, there's a hard time believing, you know, that there were people that actually belonged here first.
Right.
Right? Because then there's somehow like a lesson in like, this land is actually stolen.
Right.
And people aren't really ready to have those conversations yet, so they're trying to kind of say, oh, you weren't always here, right? And that kind of helps them feel better about being here.
As you talk, you spark some of the other things that are on display here at Keiko, including an acknowledgement from the city of Jamestown that Jamestown is on native land. And you know, that's something that is relatively recent, right?
Yeah. So that is part of the Six Nations flag raising that I hosted here July 1st, just last summer. Mm-hmm. And it was just incredible. Having the singers and the dancers here, like actually in City Hall and just outside of City Hall, which is actually where the original City Hall was. And having, you know, the singing and the drums and just all the vibrations happening, it was just immensely healing. And it was immensely healing for my mom too, because one of the people that attended was actually Mo John, who was one of the previous presidents for the Seneca Nation. And he looked at my mom and he goes, oh, I remember you. And that was so much healing for her because she had had such a distance and so many lateral things happening where she, you know, she felt like she didn't have a right anymore to it. And so that actually like gave her a lot of healing.
That must be very satisfying for you.
It definitely was, and you know, it's been kind of my like, gotta keep going, you know.
Well, it must show also to you that there are many other people like your mother who are going through the same thing and could use similar healing.
Yeah, there definitely is, and there's, you know, even though that was specifically Haudenosaunee, right, the Six Nations people, we had families there that were from other tribes from like down south that are living here, and you know, they came to me afterwards and they said, you know, we were thinking about moving because we didn't feel we had a sense of community here, and now we see this and they're like, and we know it's not really ours, right, and that was coming from a place of trauma, but they still felt it did represent them. And so that kind of is what has really led Keiko as like a force, like that there is an immense amount of just cultural gap here. And one of my initiatives that I'd like to see is bringing cultural food stability here. I'm trying to work with Gok Farms. They're a very busy company doing amazing things. And I'd like to bring them here to have easy access to these things because we don't have it. And actually, one of the pieces that I mentioned with the lithic scatter that's at the Fenton,
yes,
there for a moment where it made its big debut was actually at the Roger Tory Peterson Institute. And in that, it has braided sweetgrass. And I was talking with an elder who had worked with Twyla Nitsch, you know, grew up with Twyla, and Twyla had taught her how to make baskets with sweetgrass, and it was just something that was so engraved and rooted in her that she hadn't had access to in a long time. And so she saw that, and it brought back all these memories, and then a sadness, right, because she didn't have access to that anymore. And so I had a braid on my dashboard. I had my husband go out and get, and I gave it to her, and she started to cry. And I knew why she was crying, and I fully understood it. So I allowed her to just kind of have that moment of healing. And I sat with her. And I thought, you know, this is something it shouldn't be. You know, a lot of us aren't enrolled. A lot of us choose not to be enrolled. A lot of us don't vote. A lot of us aren't signing the census. And a lot of it is coming from places of trauma, but it has ultimately made it so that there is a large population of natives, not just Senecas, but a large population of natives that are not represented. And even with certain grants, I'm seeing where it's a requirement. You have to show that you're affiliated, you're a member, you have to be enrolled. This grant was different in the way that we didn't, and that was one of the first questions that I asked was, well, gee, I'm not enrolled, I want to be completely transparent with that,
Sure.
So do I qualify for this? And they said absolutely, right? Because it wasn't just for Native people, but it was largely, that was the target audience, right, for underrepresented artists.
Right.
And Natives being a large underrepresented population.
Right.
But now what I'm seeing with a lot of the other grants is that they are solely looking for Native artists, but they're requiring that, the plastic card.
Right.
So.
Right. We are talking with Casey Colburn today at Keiko, which is her really lovely facility here in downtown Jamestown. And there's so much to talk about. As you talk, you spark a lot of questions. But I also have a sense that you are almost willing to answer just about anything. So I'm going to ask you this. You grew up in Jamestown. What was it like for a young woman, Casey Colburn, who knew about her ancestry, but yet we're here in Jamestown? What was that like for you as a young person?
I mean, it was definitely not without its challenges. We talked a little bit about the residential schools, and one of the things that people don't really recognize with that is that it wasn't ancient history.
No.
Right? I believe one of the last schools to shut down was in the 90s.
Oh, okay.
So all of these teachers, though, still needed to be employed. So they went to other public schools. And so where the Native students ended up going, a lot of those teachers ended up following. So it didn't just end at the residential schools.
Okay.
It was just a lot more hidden. And while I can't prove that this really is connected, I do feel it is trickled down residential school behavior, because when I was in the 5th grade at the Lakewood Elementary School, which is no longer standing, I was forced to sit out in the hallway because the teacher refused to teach a Native American. And so I've had to deal with things like that. I've had to deal with...
So you were 10 years old when that happened?
Yep. And I didn't know why I was being excluded. I didn't know what I had done wrong, but my mom didn't keep me in that school for long, that's for sure.
Right.
And, I've had arguments where the teachers were actually yelling about, whether or not we lived in a longhouse. Well, that was 4th grade, I believe. And she was very adamant that we lived in teepees and wigwams because it's right here in this book. And I'm like, but Haudenosaunee means people of the longhouse. That's me.
Right.
And still, she was more entitled to knowledge than I was, because when I was just a child. And so I've had to deal with a lot of things like that. Going to school,
How did it feel for you? I mean, I can only imagine, but I mean, what do you recall about those?
I think, I was angry. I didn't really understand why I was angry, because again, I was just little.
Sure, of course.
And I didn't really understand the depths of what was happening. Looking back now, I'm like, man, today's Casey, they probably would have caught me in the parking lot, because I'm definitely one to stand up for the underdog, and to just even recognize that that type of thing was happening. There were adults all around me, and not one of them did anything.
You don't seem to have any trouble standing up on your feet now, that's for sure. And your work is speaking for itself. Was there something that changed, or did maybe those experiences just fuel you as you move forward?
So in high school, I got to experience different levels of racism. I'm pagan, so I have that little, nudge towards me too. And during a study hall was reading things about the tarot and oracle cards and study hall, right? It's a free period for everybody. And I was told to put that away, Miss Cleo. So that was where I was like, okay, that's a little bit of an aggression thing from an adult, a teacher. But then I also experienced fetishizing from an adult male teacher. And that's when I realized that, MMIW, missing murdered Indigenous women, does happen here. And, that did start to escalate, but I'm lucky in the way that nothing really, as bad as what it could have happened, didn't happen. He was investigated and he was let go permanently from the school system. But that sort of thing does definitely happen here. Racism does happen here. What was making that kind of behavior okay, and the mocking, the bullying, and things that comes with, being in a high school.
Right.
JHS had a mascot, which was a red-skinned Native American with a beer belly, the big nose. You've seen the caricatures and stereotypes, and the school's name was Red Raiders. And so my brain was going to the other mascot, Redskins, and I'm like, no, that's football. So the Red Raiders, red was in reference to the color of skin, which he was red. And then it was also, Raiders is another word for savage. Well, that would be too on the nose, so they chose another word. In the movement of trying to get rid of this logo, they used tradition as a reason to keep it. However, traditionally it was a large cat, it was a jaguar, and they lost it. So I guess their way of getting over it was to culturally appropriate and be racist. That was their way of healing. But then, one of the solutions was they were like, well, Vikings are raiders, so we'll just do that. And I was like, well, okay, so you want to take and stop appropriating one to completely appropriate another culture that you know nothing about.
Right.
That makes sense. And so I feel it was a little bit childish and a missed opportunity for creativity. But now they are the red and green. Lackluster in creativity, but they could have asked their student body to develop a new mascot, develop a new name. Those students would have been so proud of the thing that they created, they just missed it.
We are talking with Casey Colburn today here in Jamestown on What's Next. Casey, let's take a couple of moments to talk about your artwork. And again, it's pretty expansive, but I do need you to go through the traditional work with beads. You've shown me some pieces. One, I believe your grandmother did, and I think your intern did one where you think they utilized 15,000 beads. Talk about that work. I mean, you showed one actually from your earliest tries, and you disparaged it. I thought it was actually quite impressive. But what first of all drives you to try to put yourself through that type of work? Because it's obviously very intensive.
So, I mean, it started as recognizing that it was something that was of importance to my mom, to be able to pass that down. She was raised and I was raised. You think about the next 7 generations, right? And, I sat down with her and it was kind of a way of bonding, right? We just sat at the kitchen table doing beads and, exploring different types of beads. We have moments where we really like delicas because of their shape, and then, we really like the rounds. My mom is very adamant though about the size of bead. She's like, this is traditional, you're gonna do beadwork, you're gonna use size 11/0 or smaller. And I'm like, we'll stick with the 11/0s.
And just to be clear, I mean, I don't know.
Those are small, very tiny.
I don't even know if I can find a description to say how small they are. I mean, maybe a little bit bigger than a grain of salt, perhaps, right? Okay.
Yeah, so they're, I think, called seed beads for a reason.
Okay, all right. Pretty small seeds, though. I'll catch that as well, Pam. Sorry.
So, yeah, they, the methods all change depending on what it is you're working on. So if you're doing rosettes, you gotta really tack down your beads, which is almost like an embroidery type of feel, where with the necklace sometimes can do kind of like a crochet type pattern with it, or you can, I just kind of put the beads on and then make a daisy chain, which I know it's very hard to try to show that. I have tried to draw it multiple times and I've got a board behind you here that's got trying to show the flow of how to make a daisy chain. but it can be kind of a complex thing for sure.
Right.
It's almost like
So trial and error
lace.
is the way through it initially? Yeah, okay.
Kind of, yeah. And
Alright.
it's like Victorian lace. I think once you know the pattern and know how to work with beads, it becomes, easier, just like everything else.
Right.
One of the nice things that I like to kind of talk about too, and I learned about this while working at the Seneca Museum. So glass sketch beads came to us in the mid 1500s.
Okay.
And so that's when they really became a part of our, society. One of the things too that I like to talk about is, and I believe it's the National History Museum in New York. So Caroline Parker, she doesn't get nearly enough talk about, but she was very influential. Her pieces are still on display there. And some of her beadwork is something that's kind of inspired a lot of Native artists, with, our sky domes, our, her trees, everything that she's done, it's inspired and continues today and shows within the culture. She also, a lot of her textiles and things ended up going to, we had to sell some of them so that we can get back some of the land from the encroachment from the Erie Canal. And so it's really kind of cool, what beadwork has kind of done for communities, and through her work, what she wanted to do was show what being Native was. And I kind of see a reflection with that, with not just my beadwork, but everybody's beadwork, everybody that is doing beads and things. And so it really is a big dive into culture.
And how long, some of the, I didn't even get a chance when you were taking me through, how long did some of these pieces take you?
So the beadwork for me, it can take me a couple of weeks. For Grem, they have just been clipping right along. The middle of, I think it was February is when they started.
Okay.
And it's just been clipping right along with it. Or no, it was after that, because it was spring break. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the process for you, what does it do for you?
It's a good form of meditation. And,
You get lost in it? I would say, okay.
Yeah, and it can be a little bit addictive too, right? You get them done, and then you've got so many other ideas that you want to see take place. I made a Ghostbusters inspired piece out there entitled Slime. And the earrings on it are almost dish-sized, right? Very heavy to wear, but it looks so cool, and I've got so much detail in it. And I think really once I figured out, hey, I can draw with these things, I think that's really where my dig into it has really come. I enjoy making the beadwork necklaces and making the earrings. When I do that, I like to add the precious metal look to it. Just because I think that kind of brings it into the modern world a little bit more, because that's what everybody kind of is looking for now,
right.
With jewelry. And I think it kind of modernizes it just enough without really overdoing it.
I have to be curious, the earrings you have, did you make those?
My mom, actually.
Your mom made those?
Yeah.
Can you describe those for me?
So they are almost kind of like a spider web in look. With the pattern, but these are made kind of to look almost like a mandala. So very geometrical, round.
And those are beads?
Yep, with a starburst.
Wow.
So
and it's, the color choices are beautiful as well.
Yeah.
Wow. Orange, almost a teal in there as well.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, very good.
And so with her retirement, what she does is she'll Google all sorts of different things, and she sits there and she learns how to do the pattern just by watching, and she does crochet too, and she's a wizard at things. So to give her a little bit of a background, she's had issues with her eyes. We almost lost her a couple of years ago, and so she's had issues with that, with everything that comes with almost dying, and still she's just able to pick things up and just go. And to see her do crochet, she'll have the yarn in her lap or on the table, and doing it, and I've tried, and I'm like, here's like a small chain. Maybe it can be a sweater one day. I've given several of them to my little sister, saying that they are sweaters. I don't know if she's kept them, but my mom actually can make sweaters and things, and she's so quick.
Okay.
I'm not anywhere near as practiced and as quick as she is, but.
And so that's just one aspect though of your artwork.
Yeah.
You showed me some fascinating work as well of charcoal on canvas, which has a real interesting element because normally charcoal, correct, isn't used on canvas, but you actually brushed it in.
Yeah, so what I've been told is that like it's unusual to see it on there just because canvas is so like it's almost plasticky at times, right? Depending on the canvas that you're working with, and so a lot of the times charcoal will just kind of fall, right? Because as you're working it becomes like a dust, and so it just falls. And with these pieces, what I did was I used a brush just to kind of help push it into the canvas. And my thought process for that was, well, a brush knows how to work a canvas, and so maybe that's the tool I need to be using instead of blending stumps and things, which were really kind of just smearing rather than actually sticking it to. And I would go to like do it, and then it would like kind of wipe off, and I'm like, well, that wasn't helpful. So, but with the brush, it really pushed it into the material.
Right.
Giving it like an incredible depth, making my darkers even dark than what you would normally get.
And what about the inspiration is necessarily the right word I want to find here, but there is a mood in those works. From where did that emerge, or what were you trying to say in those pieces?
So those are from my Haunted Spaces exhibit. And it kind of is my like little nudge towards the paranormal background that I have. So I come from working from the paranormal field. I've done a lot of really cool things. I've worked with Nick Ruff with his new show Deathwalker. I've been.
It's on the book channel.
I think it's actually on Tubi or TiVo.
Okay.
It's newly coming. I believe in negotiations.
Yeah, fine. Okay. All right.
But yeah, so it's a really cool show though, and I've been a reenactment actress on that. I've done a lot of really cool, like, different roles on that, and I've been a tour guide for the Haunted Hinsdale House. I've been to all sorts of places doing investigations. I've apprenticed with Brian J. Cano from Haunted Collector, Paranormal Con and Camera. I've just done so many like really cool things. I've brought to the Fenton History Center paranormal tours as a fundraising opportunity for them, and it's doing fantastically. And so, it's just really part of my background as an artist, and just a really super cool genre, right? Like, even if you don't really believe in any of that, it's not really for you, a lot of times you can kind of just respect it as a genre, right? And like it in that form. And it's been just kind of cool to do that. A lot of the students at JCC are really into that sort of thing. Grum's work here is also kind of grungy, right? It's got their teeth on it, right? Where they made molds of their teeth and put on it, which is super cool. And so a lot of the students that are art majors, at JCC right now, like, they are into that Edgar Allan Poe edgy vibe. And to be able to sit in my office and like actually work on these pieces, it was something that they can connect to. One, they can take charcoal at JCC, right? You're not going to get a beadwork class at JCC.
No, right.
You can take one of my workshops, but you can't take a class there.
Okay.
And so, being able to kind of show them like, that's there. I think it also aided in a little bit of an aspect too, where like I was able to show that my identity as a Native artist didn't change just because I didn't do Native art. And as a Native artist, like, we are in constant like battle of like being tokenized, right? Where somehow our value somehow ends at being Indigenous. And then once you step outside of that, like, you're not valuable anymore. Nobody look at their art. And it was kind of my like rock star way of being like, no, look, I'm still Native.
Right.
But I did charcoal.
Right. And you also, you did some digital art as well that we had a chance to see. But in the middle of the space here at Keiko, you also had, I guess, for lack of a better term, an apron of sorts, or we'll use it as a table apron, but it had a very specific purpose behind it, and that was to connect with what is a very common and unfortunately not overly told story about missing Indigenous women.
Yeah.
Tell us about the piece.
So one of my first projects at JCC is I had a gallery show called Native Hashtags. And the goal of that show was to really give a quick introductory of some of the Native issues that we have, right? Both, in the Native community and within the greater community. And so what I wanted to really do is kind of give a quick rundown, give imagery so that they can connect a little bit more to it. I did work with the Seneca language department to also put the names in Seneca, words that are translatable, because not every word is. So that is also seen with that piece.
Okay.
And then for the interpreted ribbon skirt in the middle, really it's only on campus. The gallery has 2 windows, which is a little bit weird for lighting. So I kind of wanted to do something with that. And I made this giant interpreted ribbon skirt. And I thought, how can I make it so that the students are really taking away missing murdered Indigenous women, right? Because I think it's 3 or 4 of the hashtag posters actually has something to do with that in some way. And I didn't want them to just 45 minutes of my workshop, they heard what I said and then they left and then they went on with their day and they didn't think anything of it anymore. I wanted it to stick with them. So I decided to have everybody dip their hands in red paint. The red handprint is a symbol for missing murdered Indigenous women, and I had them all contribute to putting it on that interpreted ribbon skirt. With the full intention that, even after they wash their hands are still going to be a little bit red. So on the car ride there, maybe before they go to bed, they're going to look down, they're going to see that color, right? And they're going to remember what I was talking about. Because I wanted it to stay with them, even just a little bit longer. And that way, the women that have, gone through this, the Indigenous people that have gone through this, aren't forgotten.
Again, I have a tendency to occasionally get personal. Are you familiar with a family locally that might be dealing with that issue? Beyond some of the things that I've endured here, where I was almost part of that percentage, right? Because it's the top, not of the, but the top 40% of human sex trafficking is Native American women. And that language there, and the reason I clarify that is because that does change things. And if you really look at the size of the Native population versus the greater population in the United States and Canada, you're going to see that that's a large number for a small population. And so it is something that has happened, and with it, it's a worthwhile fear.
Yeah, and with it, we do have Native women here that have gone missing. I don't know them personally,
right?
But I have seen the posters. I have shared the posters. I have shared tears for the families, and it's something that we have to constantly think about here. It's not just with that movement, but just as being a Native American, it's not always easy, and growing up, especially my mom, when she was here, because she did move back to Jamestown for a time to live with her mom, and my grandma told her, look, if you can be any other race, be that race. Because it can be a lot harder if you admit that you're Native. And that type of stuff still happens, today, right? I mean, we just saw Cole Brings Plenty, and I'm not going to get too much in because I want to give respect to his family, but we did see it, we did hear it, and what went on with that should never have happened, and it is racism. You know, it is something that's scary that does happen every day.
We're in Jamestown on What's Next today, and we're talking with Casey Colburn here at, I'm going to call it your place. Can I call it your place? Can I call Keiko your place? Your place here on West 3rd Street, 20 West 3rd Street, just on the second floor here. And it's a nice, beautiful space, wide open with lots of art installations. Not too far from the National Comedy Store. There's something you might want to put in your mind if you're coming down this summer for a trip here to Jamestown. It was interesting, though, to hear you say how your grandmother told your mother, you know, identify yourself as anything but Seneca. You obviously, that's not a path you're taking. What does it mean for you to display your heritage like this? Is it something that you're finding a healing to? Or do you find it as an inspiration, your creativity? If you don't mind, try to explore that if you could.
So I think really what it is for me is I feel if I can stand out, maybe I can make it okay for the next guy to stand out. And, you know, I have taken a lot of hits, metaphorically, and I've had to deal with like racisms and even some, in high school and things, like I actually did have to take very literal hits. And I think if I can stand out and say, you know what, I am Native, and even though I've got this lateral, I've got people on both sides of me telling me what it is I am and what I can be or what I'm not, and at a certain point you just have to say, back up.
Right.
I'm going to be me. I know where my family comes from, and it's all around me right now. And there's power and strength in that, and I don't need necessarily like a tribal affiliation to know that I'm Native, because I know that I'm Native because I am.
Right.
And nothing else needs to be really said beyond that. And I think if I can try to stand in my own strength with it, maybe I can inspire others to do the same. And I'm not trying to encourage like people to appropriate, right? Because we do have an issue with that where, you get on 23andMe, you find one ancestor, and now, your great-great-great-grandma was 1/16 Cherokee princess. Well, that's another conversation that could also take probably a good hour.
We'll come back and have that one.
But so I'm not trying to encourage appropriation, but, one of the questions that I get is, well, what can I do if I find out that I do have this ancestor? Well, one of the things is take a moment and reflect, right? Learn about them, learn about their tribe, maybe learn their name in their native language, maybe take a Cornhuskers workshop, but don't make it your whole identity, right? You didn't live the indigenous life, don't appropriate it, right? Don't pretend to know that you know what it's like to walk in my moccasins, right? I can't say what I've had privileges living out here that some who live on the reservation have not had. Mm-hmm. But then there's also cultural privileges that they've had that I have not had.
Right.
And so you have to have a broader understanding of what's happening, and not everything is about you.
Right. You use the term metaphorical hits, and you did kind of also reference back to high school, but you're right. Like you said, you're out there. This is who you are. You're standing and hoping that helps the next guy, to quote you. Are you still getting resistance? Is it a resistance? Are you seeing an overt resistance in some way, or what are you experiencing?
Well, I think, and I guess what I would maybe hope to give the benefit of the doubt is that some of it is coming from ignorance, or like willful ignorance to a lot of degree too, just because like Salamanca is right there. Mm-hmm. But we do have people here that like they think that we've gone extinct because we don't look like what the history books say, and so that's problematic. Mm-hmm. But I also have people, that have come to me and, they either just immediately assume that I grew up on the reservation, right? Or some faraway land. And then I've got people that they get, I think, genuinely blown away that I know how to use technology, right? That I have access to technology, right? Because I think there's a very Paleolithic idea of what being Indigenous is, and then when they see me do non-Indigenous things, they're like, "What do you mean you can do that?" I've been asked questions like, "What's it like working in a white institution?" My dad is white, and I've grown up here. This is my community here,
Right.
and so it's just normal.
Right.
What are you talking about? But it just completely blows everybody away when they find out that we've modernized. But we've modernized because colonization took place here,
Sure.
right? And we've had to. It wasn't really necessarily by choice.
So, any thoughts? It sounds like you have enough on your plate right now, but any thoughts about future projects? What do you want to continue to explore?
So, I mean, I'm doing definitely a lot.
Yes, you are.
I'm currently working with a lot of boards, trying to, facilitate that. KCO, what I'd love to happen is that it become a 501c3, grow its own legs, become its own thing for the culture side, and then I can just go be an artist.
Right.
I am collaborating on a couple of different artistic projects, though, that are not really Indigenous leaning, but will still have a little bit of Indigenous room, because I am trying to gain space for these conversations. I'm trying to gain space for it to be safe to be Indigenous out here. So for now, a lot of things are going to be very, cultural leaning, or at least have some aspect relating to where I can facilitate a means to educate about certain elements, right? So I'm working on a glow-in-the-dark exhibit that is talking about the effects of colonization, but in kind of a different light, right? In regards to conservation efforts and things that we don't necessarily think about, and white sage. Everybody is kind of really into that right now because spirituality is on, just it's the hot thing. And so everybody wants white sage because they want to run around and smudge. They don't necessarily know why, but that's another conversation. But white sage is going extinct in the wild because of over-commercialization. It only grows in California. And so because of colonization and commercialization and things, the native tribes that really use this as their practices, for their ceremonies, don't have easy access to it anymore. And we see that in a lot of things. And one of the things that was recently brought to my mind is there's a tribe in South America that utilizes macaw feathers, where they don't have easy access to that because a lot of macaws are going extinct. Maybe there's protection, reasons, or sustainability reasons, but they're not using them anymore. Instead, they're using plastic straws. And that, to me, I want to learn more, and so I'm using this as kind of a take action button for me, right? I want to learn more. I'd like to eventually bring somebody in from this tribe that maybe knows more, that can give a little bit more clarity on this.
Right.
But I'd also like to point out that we're allowed to have macaws up here. I actually own one.
You own a macaw?
I own a macaw.
Really?
And
Does the macaw have a name?
Yes, Freya.
Freya, okay.
Yeah, and she's a little severe macaw, and I did also, I had a green-winged macaw and a scarlet macaw. The scarlet is, her name was Nana, and then the green-wing is Odin. Green wings are the largest of the birds, well, the second largest. The hyacinth macaw is the first. And there were others, but unfortunately they've gone extinct. And so macaws have always been a big part of my life, right? And I love birds, and to hear this story and knowing that I have these feathers, can I send it? Well, you can't, because there's restrictions, right? You have to have certain permits and things. So
Send feathers.
To send feathers. And so I'm trying to figure out what the proper way of doing that is, so that I can maybe one day send these macaw feathers down to them, so that maybe it's a little bit more sustainable for them, And so this glow in the dark, it is going to be through an indigenous lens, right? Because we are talking about colonization. We are talking about the effects that colonization has had on everyday things that we don't really think about, right? And it's going to be done in a very modern way, right, with glow in the dark. And so I'm very excited for it. There's going to be just a variety of different types of works in there. I've got some glow in the dark ribbon skirts that I've been working on with my mom. Some beadwork that I've been working on that does show the Caroline Parker like designs that are glow in the dark, and just a bunch of digital artwork that is all macaw based and going to be hopefully glow in the dark. So
And that'll take place here?
that'll take place here.
Wow.
So it's a very large conversation, and at first I wasn't sure how I was going to help other people like see the connection, right? See all the dots. So I'm like, talking to other artists, I'm like, I promise you the dots are there. I promise you. If you just stick with me, we will see it happen.
Do you have to tell yourself that sometimes too? Like, this is gonna work.
Yeah.
I don't know how it's gonna work, but it's gonna work.
Almost all the time. And my projects, I'm so good at manifesting, right? And so I'll like say, like when I wanted the macaws, like I was like, I just want a little bird. I had little birds growing up, I want a little bird. And creator or somebody was like, well, okay, here you go. Here's these 3 macaws. And I was like, oh, okay. All right. And, I'm just thankful of everything that I've done and everything that I've that's led up to this point, right? Where now I'm able to actually share these stories. And, because within the animal topic, I come from I was a dog trainer. I've worked with a lot of different animals. I volunteered at J&K Call the Wild, which is lions, tigers, and bears. And I've done so many cool things that it almost telling everybody without people actually being there to see that I've done these things. I would feel like a pathological liar, right? Because
You wouldn't believe it if someone was telling you the story.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I've just done so many incredible things, and it's finally coming to a point where I'm able to actually tell these stories, and share other stories, right? Like my mom's, which I feel is a very important one. There are other, young people like me that are Seneca or Haudenosaunee that are also sharing their family story, right? And so it's all starting to really come out, and with that is going to come all these little side quest stories that I've had, working with lions and tigers and bears. And I mean, we were snowmobiling, and I was like, is that a tiger? And because they were just right in the middle of nowhere, and I think we knocked on their door and we're like, hey, what is this place? And we were like, hey, can we volunteer? I would love to volunteer here. And I actually, for the longest time, I was going to Joe's Meat Market on Forest and Newland.
Okay.
And they used to, all the meat that they would have to get rid of at the end, right, because they can only keep it for so long, they would box it up for me with a lot of ice, and I would take it out to Forestville, and we would, I give it to them. And
Wow.
So it was it included the community here even, and so I've been, for the longest time, community-based, and if I see a problem, I'm gonna come up with at least 5 different solutions.
I appreciate all the stories that you shared with us in this hour on What's Next, Casey Coburn. If somebody wanted to find out more about you or Keiko, what's the best way to proceed? How do we? And I know you even showed me here at Keiko that some of your work is on for sale as well, and I'm sure just based on some of the things I've seen here, there might be interest in that. What's the best way to proceed?
I think right now, I did, and it might still be there, but I'm kind of consolidating everything into just keiko.art.
Okay.
And then that way, because I have become a little bit too of a political figure, so the CaseyColburn.com I'm hoping will just be that. And then that way it's a little bit separated and not so confusing for everybody.
Gotcha.
Because I think while I was running, maybe it was a little bit weird for everybody to pop open my thing and then they see my Cauldron Talk, podcast and all these other different things, and down at the bottom, please vote.
Very good. Well, Casey, I really appreciate you, sharing. You're very open about everything, and thanks for having us here at KCO.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
This has been What's Next. Our guest, Casey Colburn, here in Jamestown, today at her center, KCO, on West 3rd Street here in downtown Jamestown. This has been What's Next on WBFO.